Okay, so you want to own a zoo. Families lining up every weekend. School groups booking field trips months in advance. A business that sells wonder itself. The chance to stand 3 feet from a tiger. Nobody questions why they're paying admission. The animals are the product. And unlike almost any other attraction, your inventory reproduces itself. That is the dream. And it is not entirely wrong. Here's what it doesn't tell you. A zoo can generate genuine, loyal, recurring revenue for decades and still be seized entirely, animals and all, over a lawsuit that has nothing to do with how well you cared for a single creature on the property. Because in this business, a single unresolved legal judgment can end up mattering more than every dollar of ticket revenue you ever collected. Let's start with what it costs to build one. A single major exhibit alone can run into the millions. London Zoo's Sumatran tiger enclosure cost over £3.6 million, and a follow-up Asiatic lion habitat added another £5.2 million. Milwaukee County Zoo's elephant habitat cost $16 million. Its hippo exhibit cost $10 million, and a proposed rhino enclosure was priced at $22 million, roughly $12 million over the original 2013 estimate purely from a decade of construction inflation. Memphis Zoo is currently midway through a $250 million 20-year transformation, building on more than $118 million already invested in exhibits since the early 1990s. On the smaller end, a modest petting zoo can be built for roughly $555,000 in total capital expenditure, with animal acquisition, transport, quarantine, and veterinary intake alone commonly running $80,000 for the first few months. Between those two extremes sits an enormous range because, unlike a restaurant or a retail store, a zoo's build cost scales almost entirely with which species you choose to house. And a single meerkat exhibit can run 7 figures, while a snowy owl enclosure built in-house might cost under $10,000. Before a single visitor buys a ticket, you're carrying ongoing costs that most attractions never face. Every enclosure has to meet species-specific safety, containment, and enrichment standards, and those standards apply continuously, not just at the opening. Licensing under the Federal Animal Welfare Act, state wildlife permits, and for larger zoos, accreditation from the Association of Zoos and Aquariums all carry their own compliance costs and periodic inspections. Veterinary care for exotic species requires specialized staff most local vets can't provide, and food, enrichment, and habitat maintenance run every single day regardless of attendance. Since unlike inventory in a warehouse, the animals in your care can't simply sit unattended during a slow month. Here's the trap sitting underneath the entire business, and it's one that has nothing to do with animal husbandry at all. A zoo's core assets, its land, its animals, and its physical structures can all become entangled in ordinary civil litigation exactly the way any other business's assets can, except the consequences are dramatically higher stakes, since a forced closure doesn't just shutter a storefront, it displaces living animals who need somewhere to go. And because roadside and privately owned zoos often operate on thin margins with owners who may not have deep legal or financial reserves, a single unresolved judgment, even one for a relatively modest dollar amount, can end up costing an owner the entire operation, land, animals, and reputation included, if it isn't handled properly and promptly. Once operating, the revenue model runs through familiar attraction industry layers. Ticket sales and membership programs form the core, with memberships providing predictable, recurring revenue similar to a gym or a mall's anchor tenant strategy, locking in repeat visits throughout the year. Food and beverage, retail gift shops, and special events, birthday parties, after-hours experiences, animal encounters, all add meaningfully higher margin revenue on top of admission. Larger accredited zoos increasingly rely on donor and membership society support, exactly the funding structure behind Milwaukee's exhibit expansions, where a nonprofit zoological society covers a significant share of major capital projects the county government can't fully fund alone. Now the disaster case study, and it's one of the most widely known business collapses in recent American media, precisely because 34 million people watched it happen. Joseph Maldonado Passage, known as Joe Exotic, built the G.W. Exotic Animal Memorial Park in Wynwood, Oklahoma, into a roadside attraction housing hundreds of big cats and other exotic animals, generating real ticket revenue and international recognition. eventually the subject of Netflix's Tiger King. In 2011, a Florida-based animal sanctuary called Big Cat Rescue, run by Carol Baskin, won a trademark infringement lawsuit against him, resulting in a $1 million judgment. Rather than pay it, Exotic quietly transferred the 16-acre zoo property to his mother, an attempt, according to sworn testimony she later gave, specifically designed to move the land out of reach of his creditors. For years, the zoo continued operating normally, generating revenue, drawing visitors, and building the reputation that would eventually fuel one of the most watched documentaries in streaming history. None of that mattered. Once a federal judge examined the transfer, in 2020, the court ruled the land transfer fraudulent and awarded the entire zoo property, along with several cabins and vehicles, directly to Baskin's organization to satisfy the original judgment, ordering the operating tenant to vacate within 120 days and remove every animal from the premises. Exotic himself was by then serving a 22-year federal sentence for a murder-for-hire plot against Baskin along with separate wildlife trafficking charges. But the zoo's forfeiture was a purely civil matter, triggered entirely by an unpaid $1 million debt from nearly a decade earlier. Baskin eventually sold the property for $140,000, a fraction of what the zoo and its exhibits had cost to build over the years, and included a permanent legal condition barring the land from ever being used as a zoo again for 100 years. A business that had operated for decades, drawn hundreds of thousands of visitors, and become genuinely globally famous, ceased to exist not because of an animal welfare failure or a bankruptcy from poor attendance, but because one unresolved civil judgment, left unpaid and improperly concealed, eventually caught up with every asset the business owned. Let's run the numbers on two scenarios. Optimistic case, you build a $2 million mid-size zoo with several signature exhibits, properly licensed and accredited, generating steady annual attendance revenue of $1.5 million a year through tickets, memberships, and retail, against operating costs of roughly $1.1 million, leaving a genuine $400,000 annual margin, with a nonprofit society structure helping fund future exhibit expansions the way Milwaukee's zoo has done for decades. Realistic case? The same zoo, financially sound in its day-to-day operations, but entangled in an unresolved legal dispute, a lawsuit over animal welfare, a trademark or business dispute, or a creditor claim, the owner attempts to sidestep rather than resolve directly. Attendance, revenue, and reputation can remain strong for years, exactly as GW Zoos did before its 2020 forfeiture. But once a court judgment attaches to the underlying property itself, rather than simply the business's cash flow, the entire operation, animals included, can be transferred away in a matter of months, regardless of how many visitors walked through the gates the week before. So, if you decide to own a zoo, understand what you're actually buying. You're not just buying an attraction with built-in self-renewing demand, though it genuinely can be that. You're buying a business where your land and your living inventory are both, legally speaking, ordinary seizable assets, exactly like a warehouse or a fleet of trucks. Except a forced transfer doesn't just cost you money, it costs you the animals themselves. Resolve every legal obligation directly and promptly, and this can be one of the most beloved, multi-generational institutions a community can have. Try to quietly outrun a judgment the way Joe Exotic did, and you may find that the exact same fame that built your zoo's visibility is what puts a magnifying glass on the debt you were hoping nobody would notice.